This we're live. All right, we're live. All right, coming out. Hello, welcome to some Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host Mango,
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
and today we're going to talk a little bit about Dune. But before we do that, buddy, why don't you tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
On this podcast, we talk about games. We talked about a game last time, which is good because we're not talking about a game for like the rest of the fucking year. There's so many
Yeah,
movies and things coming out, right? And today is no different. Today we are talking about the latest Denis Villeneuve movie, Dune, that just released on HBO Max and in theaters simultaneously, which both Mango and I have seen in theaters. I watched it in like the Dolby special theater that I've talked about before on the podcast, and you just watched it in a regular person movie theater.
yeah. I mean, it was a large theater, right? It's not like one of these tiny theaters.
Okay.
But yes. Also relevant. Um, Buddy read half of Dune long ago and doesn't remember it. I have very
Yep.
recently read the first 4 Dune books.
I
Um,
remember very little about Dune
um,
whatsoever.
so going into it, so before spoilers, buddy, what are your pre-spoiler thoughts?
My pre-spoiler thoughts are this movie's amazing and I love every fucking frame of it. I had such a good time. And I want to be clear. I had such a good time, and I think that there are problems that I'm sure we're going to talk about, and then I'm sure we'll agree on. I've kind of agreed with a lot of the discourse around like Dune and why people aren't necessarily connecting with Dune, but I also just think that everything else is so good that it makes up for it like far and away, right? And I sort of disagree with some of the more kind of I don't know, maybe I would call them inflammatory takes, right? Like I think Dune is a very, very good film, even if it has quite a number of issues that like make it not perfect, right? Just because like the stuff that is good is just so good. And I was like, man, I don't know. I also do want to add a quick note. I think Dune on HBO Max. I haven't watched it on HBO Max. I don't know, but I think it will probably suck. And this is the kind of movie that movie theaters are built for. And I would highly, highly recommend everyone go see this in a theater because it's just like, man, it just like I was living for this movie.
It
This is
is a
the movie that
cinematic
I wanted
movie.
to come back to watching theaters in for, right? Like that. It was this kind of thing.
All right, so that's I think that's a very reasonable take. Um, I, on the other hand, am going to like I thought this was a very beautiful movie. But I was this is going to be a classic, kind of like the book's better, and
Mm,
I'm having trouble getting past it. Like a lot of the stuff, like the movie just doesn't have enough time to um like bring out the texture of what makes Dune great, which is kind of like the nuance and the politics in the world. Um, also, I have some specific complaints that we'll get into. I haven't been following the discourse, so I don't know what the general discourse is.
You
Um,
know, I don't know what Rotten Tomato. I just kind of like know what my Twitter feed says. Like, what is the Rotten Tomatoes on Dune?
yeah, no, my Twitter feed has said watch it in IMAX and then like various forms of positive
Yep.
with like
Yeah,
maybe
Lou
a
says in the chat. I've read everything I've read on this says to not watch it on HBO Max, which of course is countered immediately thereafter by HBO Max for life. um,
if
but
he's stuck
oh
a
wow, yeah. See, Dune. People really like Dune. It's 83% and 91% audience score. That's actually really
yeah,
good.
no, I mean,
I kind of expected this not to connect with people as much as it,
like
you know,
I think
it connected with me.
I think it's I think it's a really good movie. I just like I just I recognize that I am being unfair since I just don't
Sure,
like, the stuff in the book. And I think there's some stuff that they did well, but like I think that's a good place to leave the pre-spoiler stuff. Um
absolutely.
spoilers for the first 4 books, I guess. Although unless if you don't want me to spoil it for you, buddy, I can also hold back on those.
No,
Um
let's talk about it. I want to know. I want to know all of like the intricate details that like I'm missing by not having read the book
um
beforehand.
Still okay, so spoilers for the first 4 books potentially, spoilers for the movie. Have you seen the David Lynch movie? Because I have not.
I have not seen the David Lynch
All
movie.
right, so no
I think
spoilers
I
for
think
that
it
movie.
was maybe in the background when I was in college, and we like there's a lot of those like movies that I watched in college, but I was mostly just hanging out with people. And maybe this was one of those, but I don't remember the David Lynch movie at all.
Okay. But yeah, let's get into it. What do you want to talk about first?
I guess my core thing that I think is not great about the movie is that it doesn't have a like a sort of like a traditional plot structure that kind of crescendos and climaxes, right? The it kind of just feels like the movie is just telling the story. The story is just chugging along, and then all of a sudden it fades to black.
Yeah,
It stops.
that is one review that I saw, which was it is definitely one half of a good movie, right?
Yeah.
Like, which I think
And
like
like I think I disagree with that to a certain extent, right? Like, it didn't feel quite as clean as the example that I'm about to give, which is like Lord of the Rings or like The Hobbit, right? Both of which are had a first installment that kind of had like a clear end point, right? But that end point did sort of like leave the rest of it kind of feeling a little bit like incomplete or whatever, but like there's a follow-up, so you kind of just like sort of like let it go. I don't think Dune was really marketed as the first
right,
half of a
okay,
movie,
right,
compared to the sort of the trilogy that you walk into with Lord of the Rings, right? We all know Lord of the Rings was going to be a trilogy. We all knew the Hobbit movie was going to have sequels or whatever, right? So those movies kind of ending abruptly sort of like felt a little bit better than it felt like in Dune. But you know, it was a very similar sort of feeling, right? Where it was pretty clear that the core drama had yet to be resolved in the way that, in like those two movies. So I don't really think that's like huge downer. Really, I think the tough part is there's a lack of a real kind of climax, right?
yeah,
Because even in like Lord of the Rings, right? Like even in Fellowship of the Ring, there's a real climax to that story where the Fellowship dissolves. Boromir tries to steal the ring, right? You have that feeling of crescendo, even though the story is fundamentally incomplete, and we all know that there's more to it after this sort of thing. Um, making kind of centering the climax being about Paul. God, it's so weird that his name is just normal. It's just Paul. It's not something like sci-fi, like
oh yeah,
Tithenios or something, right? Like
or like Leto or Duncan, right? Like how like
yeah, yeah.
um
I mean,
or
Duncan,
Thunfear,
Idaho was pretty funny because is it just spelled Idaho like
yeah,
the U.S. state?
oh yeah.
I remember thinking I was like, what? Idaho? What? Like
So
that
so
was
there's a lot of little stuff in the books that's kind of like this is clearly like a reference to Earth that existed at one point, but like no one really remembers.
oh,
Um,
interesting. Okay.
like um like there's like the Orange Catholic Bible, which I think is like mostly like the regular Bible, but not quite. It's not really explicated or explained like what makes a difference. But uh uh to your point, right? Like that it's I don't know. It's I so my biggest problems with the movie again are things that oh, the climax thing. I think the climax was supposed to be the fall of Arrakis to the Harkonnens. Um and I
Yeah,
think
see, the thing is that feels like the inciting incident. That does not feel like the climax,
no,
right?
I think maybe this should have been like so I honestly think it should have been a prestige television series, although I don't you can't get like
Okay, I do disagree with that take, but sure, go
so
for it.
structurally, right? Like I
Yeah,
get your like cinematic whatever, right? Like it should have been a prestige TV series that you could only see in theaters or something, right? Like the old
yeah.
series,
Because yeah, like that's my core problem. When people say this should have been a prestige TV series, I think that kind of suggests all else being equal, which fair enough, right?
yeah,
Sure, if we have a cinematic budget and all of these amazing movie stars
yeah.
giving amazing movie star performances with amazing movie cinematography and sound, at like yes, sure, I would agree that it should be a prestige TV series. But the reality is, if it was a prestige series, a lot of those things would have taken hits that I would not be willing to sacrifice. I would much rather the plot be worse than lose like Oscar Isaac and Timothy Chalamet, right? Just like all of the like every single actor in this was so good.
It should have been 12 hours long. Is what I'm
Yeah.
really saying. um,
Yeah.
but to your point, like I don't know. I think maybe just to disagree with you a little bit. Like I agree with like the set dressing was all great, but like again, the thing that I think makes Dune great is kind of like the texture of the politics of the world, and I think that that's a better fit for a prestige television series.
Sure.
Or maybe like, I don't know, this movie that ends in, or like, you know, like a series that has like movies to do like the big moments or something stupid like that. I don't know. But my single biggest problem is, and this is a very book direct comparison thing, is that they screwed up Jessica's character so
Okay.
much. Like, she is like such a worse character in the movie. They also did
Wow, that's really interesting. Okay.
so like in the books, and I think I understand the reason for it, right? In the book, she's like kind of like stone cold, like, and not that she doesn't care about Paul, but she would never outwardly show it, right? Like, watching Jessica cry was like that's not this character, right? And like watching her, like she is just every bit as like badass and like politically savvy as any other character, more so even. And she seems kind of like for lack of a better term, it seems like they like bridged her. That's like the right term, right? Like, maybe that's not the right term, but like they like made her more stereotypically a woman, which was like weird. Um,
Okay. Yeah, I don't think that's quite fridging is when you kill a woman character
okay,
to kind of make her like a plot object, right? In a guy's, it comes from comics. Where there was a Green Lantern comic, and Green Lantern's girlfriend is just abruptly murdered so that he can have some drama or whatever,
okay,
and it's kind of like discarding a female character, right? For the purposes of like some guy that's like kind of grossness behind what fridging means.
okay. But you know, they basically made her more stereotypically woman, and made her less badass, which really rubbed me the wrong way, right?
Wow. Okay. I would
Like,
definitely describe her as a badass, right? Like,
um, I mean, so I think part of this is maybe that, like, so the books are kind of weird, right, in a lot of ways. And like Herbert definitely had some like very like, you get all the way to the fourth book and you get some weird fucking stuff about like Frank Herbert's thoughts about how like the world works, right? Um, uh,
okay.
like you get like a child wearing worm skin talking, like basically being like basically being a giant fascist and being like, you'll thank me later. And effectively he's right. Like, it's like, I need to be a terrible person so humanity can survive. It's a weird fucking series. Um, but like I don't know. It just seemed like the idea that Jessica would cry like during that scene doesn't make a lot of sense. And part of this is that like you do get that she's like nervous, but that's all internal monologue in the book, right? Like, outwardly she wouldn't show it, right? Like,
Okay.
um, and like and like uh the idea that like she's this is another little thing, but like at the end where she's like, Paul needs to get off planet, like she would she would have already have thought of what Paul said, right? Like that kind of thing, right? Like, and that's not a huge, like, that particular moment's not a huge deal, but like there's just lots of little things in here that I don't like. Like, I think they also did UA dirty, the doctor.
Mhm.
Um, but like, this is not a huge deal, but like in the book, he like basically knows that he's being taken for a ride, right? Like, he's like, I am almost positive that the Baron's lying to me, but I absolutely have to know, right? Like, that is how much I love my wife, right? So like,
Sure.
which is like slightly different here, which is where he's just, it seems like he's kind of duped, right? So, which is again not a huge
Yeah,
deal.
I mean, I guess there's a bit of that. He also obviously gives God, who's the leader of House Atreides?
Leto,
Leto. He gives Leto like the poison tooth to like fuck up the Baron as kind of an escape plan or whatever, which suggests a little bit more depth there. But I see what you mean for
yeah.
sure.
And I actually think that they did the tooth scene better than in the book. Um, so in the book, the Baron just basically runs out of the room and slams it behind him. But it, and I thought the scene in the book, like, you know, like his death felt a little bit impotent, but it's also it's a little bit better in the book because David Dastmalchian's character um, gets more characterization, and he dies as a result of the poison too. So it doesn't feel quite so useless as it would have if the Baron wasn't hurt at all in the movie. Um, but uh, yeah. What else is in here that bothered me or I liked a lot? Oh, I really liked, so the little mouse thing. That's
Mhm.
that's so in the books. Um, when the like this will probably happen at the open of the next movie, so spoilers for the next movie probably. Um, the Freeman would say, "What's your Fremen name going to be?" And he points to one of the little mice, and he says, "What's that called?" And he says, "It's a Muad'Dib." And so he takes the name Muad'Dib. Um,
Oh, okay.
yeah. And like there's like it's not as in the text. There's not as many as many um it's not like brought up as much, right? Like there's like several like moments where it's clearly like focused on, which I think is a thing that a movie can do better than a book, right? Like, use that visual language to foreshadow stuff. I thought it was really good. Um uh and and there's just so much little stuff that like you can't get, right? Like there's I would have been probably happier if they even made this three movies. There's a scene in the book where Leto has a party, right? Like it's like a standard like affair, right? Um, and he's basically doing like things get done the same way as they did under the Harkonnens, and part of this involves like I think it's like washing the guests' feet, which is like super wasteful of water. This is another thing. This is the thing that I think they really got wrong. Like driving home just how valuable water is. It's like all over the book. It's like everything is like and they did an okay job. It's water is never
I
wasted.
definitely got the sense that water was a precious resource for sure,
So
right?
it's precious, but like it's like so precious that like someone crying is like it's not a thing you get, right? Like this is a big moment in the book is that Paul cries um at I can't remember the character's name, Javis, the guy he kills. He cries at his funeral, and this is like you give water to the dead, and it's like seen as being super respectful, right? Because you're giving up your bodily. It's a whole thing. Again, a little bit weird, but yeah. And I just like I got that like I think they did an okay job. I don't think it was ideal, if that makes sense. I don't know. I don't know. I got caught up on a lot of these little things. Well, we talk about some good stuff too. So I'm not just like
Yeah, I
ranting
mean,
about book
so the
differences.
one thing that okay, so somebody I've mentioned him on the podcast a million times, right? Patrick H. Willems. Patrick had a video last year, I think, which was he called it was like saluting the Gonzo class of blockbuster movies of like the 2010s, right? Which included Aquaman, Mortal Engines, Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, right? Just like any one of these like big, huge sci-fi. Jupiter Ascending is another going on. Just like these huge sci-fi movies, right? Most of which were critically reviled and box office bombs, except for Aquaman, which made $1 billion or whatever. But he talked about how like the thing he loves about these sorts of movies, right, is that just like every frame has him going like, "What's that? I need to know more about this. Tell me everything about like this thing," right? And in that sense, like Dune is like the perfect Gonzo movie, right? There's so much stuff that's just like so cool all the time, right? Like the function of the ornithopters, I was just like immediately invested in, right? Or just like honestly, like the way that in the attack, you could see it's the kind of stuff that like drew me as a kid to Star Wars, right? Like the tangibility of sort of like the universe and its world building, right? Where like you could see the bullet fires from space, penetrates through the thing's shield, then it explodes and it's contained inside of the shield until the shield fails and it explodes outward. It's just like how cool is that concept, right? Is that idea, right? Or like the like the slow moving things kind of get through your shield but fast moving things sort of like bounce off, so they're all using melee weapons, right? Like how cool is this shit? And I just like every 5 seconds it felt like in this movie there was just like something awesome to think about and to just go like, oh, that's so cool, oh, that's so neat, right? Like the Chris daggers, and they're made out of the tooth of the sandworms, just the sandworms as they are, they're just so fucking cool, right? And that's the stuff that just like, it makes me, I like I just like you come out of those movies, you're like energized, in a way that it makes me want to like run a million D&D campaigns all at once, right? Like that kind of a thing. And that's like the underlying thing that just like makes Dune, compared to, obviously I love Denis Villeneuve. Sicario is like I still think Sicario is his best movie. But like we did Blade Runner 2049, like that movie is insane and it's insanely good. But I even wouldn't call that, but I don't think that's good in like the Gonzo way, right? Like the thing that makes that movie good are all character and theme and kind of the mystery and this idea that like you don't need to be a chosen one in order to be like a hero to save the world, right? Like that kind of stuff, right? Like all of that stuff is great, and none of that stuff is really in Dune, right? The best it seems you get in Dune is like be nice to indigenous people, maybe. I don't know, like thematically, what's going on with Dune? It's pretty straightforward. There's not a ton there, right? But just like God, the world itself was so crazy and expressive that I loved it so fucking much. I don't know. I just
Yeah,
loved every
no,
second of
that's
it.
definitely fair, and that's like 90% of that like awesome crazy world building that you don't quite understand is also in the is also in the books,
Yeah,
right? So
sure.
like, and then
It's a lot
that's
easier in a book to have like a couple of pages where someone explains the function of a still suit, right? Like in minute detail versus spending a minute and a half on it in a movie. In a movie, spending a minute and a half on that feels like wasteful
no, I
in a
mean,
way.
but the book still like yes, there is some more there is more detail in the books, but it also has that level of kind of like this is referenced but not explained, right? Like
Oh, sure.
the head of every chapter is it's usually from like it's in like almost all the books I've read. The head of the chapters are like a quote from a book that's written about the event that you're like the event that's the plot of the book in the future, right? So like, and obviously that gives away like that like the basic resolution, right? Like the a lot of the chapter headings in Dune is Princess Erlon, who is the Emperor's daughter, writing about Paul being the Emperor because spoilers, it works out, right? Like
Yeah.
Paul forces the Emperor to marry him off to one of his daughters, and you don't like get the little details there, but like you get kind of like oh this is like and like the Butlerian jihad is mentioned. It's not really gone into until like that got into until like his son writes a book about it, like writes books about it. But that's why there are no computers. Um, is because they like made AIs at one point, and then there was a big war, and AIs were banned. Um, and that's basically all you get about it, right? It's like referenced and invoked, and like certain like computational things are taboo. But that's about all you get. And so yes, that is a strength of the series. And I will say that Denis definitely added to it, right? Like that, like the bomb thing you were talking about.
Mhm.
That's not a thing that's really described in the book. Like I think I have some idea of what it's supposed to be referencing, but like that's obviously the visual language does a lot more for it. And
Yeah.
like Herbert's not the type of guy to discuss things in like excruciating detail, especially even like battle scene stuff. Right, like the book is very like not political in kind of like the like commentary sense, but just like about like it's a political drama, if that
Like
makes
yeah, about the politics in the same way Game of Thrones might be,
yes,
right?
yes,
Like
yeah.
yeah.
Um, in a way that I think um wasn't covered as deeply as I would have liked to in the movie, but you've only got so much time and it is a space epic, so
Yeah, I mean, I do think I had a very good sense of, like the political intrigue and everything with the emperor. I didn't feel like any of that was underexplained
oh, no,
or,
so
I'm sure there's way more of it in the
that
books.
yeah,
Like, and
that's
there's
what
a
I
lot,
mean.
lot more cat and mouse and back and forth. Yeah.
Like the political like the politics in the movie are fine and functional. It's just that like it doesn't have all the depth and nuance and you know uh intrigue that are very present in the books. Um, but like I said, you just can't unless you're doing a prestige TV series, you just can't do it that way.
Yeah.
Uh, oh, what
God,
else?
that's interesting. But yeah, because I thought that the like the Harkonnen, Atreides sort of like rivalry, and you got the sense that the Duke knew what was coming, right? He talks about like, oh, like I should have married you or whatever, and he was like,
I'm
and
I'm actually
like
I'm actually curious. Do you understand like what that was about? Like
I probably don't understand the specifics. I realized that they were not formally married, and like, because she's referred to as his concubine, right, rather than his wife. Um, and I didn't know any of the detail. I mean, can he not marry the Bene or whatever they're called?
Bene Gesserit. No, it's not that. So he
Okay,
chooses not to. So this is one of these cool political nuances, right? He does not marry her because him being single means he can like negotiate alliances better because the other houses think that like maybe they can like marry into him, right? Like, even though like he's not like like we know he's never going to because Jessica is his one true love forever, right?
yeah.
And like that's his like the fundamental like character. Like Leto is a good man, and his biggest mistake is not marrying Jessica. And like at the end of the day, it's not it's a very practical political thing, and that's like his only kind of like moral failing. And at the end of the day, it's not that bad. As
I loved
contrasted,
I every second. I was actually really afraid at first, to be honest. I was a little like, I thought that this was going to be the kind of like getting daddy's love sort of movie, because it seemed like it was going in that direction, right, where it was like, oh no, like, Paul is going to be training and he has this big destiny that he has to like train up for, and his dad is going to be like shitty about it, but like eventually he'll get that like begrudging dad whatever. And I was like gearing myself for that, and then they have this conversation out in this, and just like all these landscapes, right, like in this, and it must have been urns or something, like these like gravestones, I'm assuming, like
yeah,
crypts or whatever. Tombs is what I'm trying to say. Um, and he says, like, you will, and then Paul goes, well, what if I can't be that stuff? He goes, well, then you'll be the only thing I ever needed you to be, my son. And I literally cried. I burst into tears. I was like, first of all, just because the moment was legitimately touching, but secondly, because I was so happy that the movie didn't do the thing I was really scared it was gonna do, that I thought was really fucking hacky. And I was just like, man, I love this.
that
He's
moment
just like a good dad.
that moment was in the trailer, which I think robbed it of some of its emotional
Oh,
impact.
okay. I did not
Um,
see whatever that trailer was. I guess
yeah,
then.
yeah, but no, I agree with you, right? Like, like I said, Leto's thing is he's a good dude, and that stands in stark contrast to like almost every other character, especially as time goes on, um, and like in the vein of like Frank Herbert has some like weird beliefs, right? Like in some respects, like Leto being such a good dude is why he gets himself killed, and like maybe he should have been a little bit more ruthless, right? Like, um, it's a weird series, um, but
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I also, and honestly, this happened in a bunch of other places too. The part where so the first time you meet Duncan, Idaho, right? He and Paul just kind of do this big flying hug, and it's great, and they have this great, and they're just, you can tell they're such buds, like. And then the second time, when, because Duncan goes first, and then Paul meets Duncan later, and they do that exact same hug. I also cried at that part, and I cried the third part where Duncan sacrifices himself, killing all those badass dudes, and I was just like, this movie is the greatest shit. I don't know why. I was just so in the emotional moment of it, right? Like, you, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's just like the directing or the action or something, but I there's it was like I was just really invested in the emotional moment, even though I had just like met this character, right? Like, I really felt that they had been apart for 4 weeks, and it had been eating Paul alive, and he was just so happy to see his good bud Duncan Idaho again, right? I don't know. It just like hit me in. It's, what it's like. It reminds me of Fast and Furious 9, right? I famously cried 7 times during that movie, right? And part of why that happens is because I have all of this buildup, right? Like all of these other movies, the Tokyo Drift guys going to the barbecue at the end of the film, and then Han shows up and they think Han died, right? They watched Han die in a big fiery car crash, right? And Han gives them all this great big hug. Obviously, I'm gonna cry, like, I'm really in it. But the thing is, Dune got me to that in one movie, right? Like, that goes like in that exact same space in one film, right? And I don't know. There's something about like the actors. A movie that I watched recently was The Social Network. Have you ever seen The Social Network? I'm sure, right?
I have not seen the Social Network actually.
What? No way. They filmed at Hopkins.
Yeah, I know. I
Yeah.
just never got around to seeing it.
Yeah, so I mean, so obviously the Social Network is set in Harvard, but you can't film on Harvard's campus. They
Right.
famously won't allow anybody to film there. So people film on the Johns Hopkins campus because they look marginally similar because all the buildings are brick. But
I would
anyway,
say marginally. I think it's. I think they're like like it makes the same architectural style, right? It's not just that
yeah,
they're brick.
yeah, definitely. But I was thinking about the Social Network, right? And I was thinking about how Justin Timberlake, Jesse Eisenberg, and Andrew Garfield all gave their best performances in this movie. I actually think I might have said that Andrew Garfield was better in silence, but then I rewatched it and I was like, no, man, he is so good in this movie. And I was just like, and there was something about like these actors and how they really got into it, right? And how just like nowhere else have they been able to like kind of capture this stuff. I feel like the same exact thing happened in Dune with a bunch of these characters, right? Jason Momoa has never been more perfectly Jason Momoa than playing Duncan Idaho, right? Where he is simultaneously like the biggest bro in the room, but also has a really big heart and will sacrifice himself to keep his friends alive, right? Oh god, I was gonna say Justin Roland. Josh Brolin is insanely good. What was that? What's that character's name?
Gurney
Like the
Halleck.
master of. Sorry, what?
Gurney Halleck.
Gurney? His name is Gurney?
Yeah.
Okay, well, whatever. He's great in that role too, right? And like, and I think Justin Brolin's a very good character or a very good character actor, right? Where he's kind of playing these like hard-edged tough guys in every, like in No Country for Old Men, even as sort of
Thanos.
like Thanos, right? This is his shtick. He is great at
Yeah.
this role, right?
So this is and I don't think this is his fault, but like Gurney Halleck's supposed to be a little bit more of a warrior poet. Like half of what he does in the book is like play a balisette. That's why Timothy Chalamet, or that's why Paul's like play us a tune, right? Because like that's also what he does is he like plays songs.
Oh,
Um
interesting.
yeah. But I don't think it's the end of the world that like he is not, you know, playing a balisette in this movie. But
Yeah, and I just think that like this is quintessential this is probably the best Josh Brolin performance I can think of because like I mean he's not even on screen that much. I mean he dies, right? He sort of is implied to die. Ooh, oh, okay. Well,
yeah, I would say he's implied to die, and then you find out that he doesn't. At least in the
oh,
book.
okay. Well, fair enough. But my point is he's only in like half the movie. The back half of the movie he's completely gone, right? But you get a lot of sense of like the texture of this character, and he feels at once kind of archetypical, right? Like, I think Aragorn is a lot like this, right? Like that as Aragorn is like the lost prince kind of trope, right? With like the heir to the throne who doesn't necessarily want the throne but has to be like convinced into it. Aragorn is that archetype, right? Sort of played dead straight. And I think in a lot of ways he kind of originates that archetype, right? But he's also an incredibly like nuanced version of that archetype. And I got the exact same feel out of Gurney, just in terms of like he's definitely like a hard ass and like hard nosed, but I never got the sense the easy thing to happen with this kind of character is that he is gonna like butt heads with Leto because Leto's a good guy and he doesn't want to, Gurney wants you to be tough and he thinks being tough is strong or whatever, and then Leto wasn't tough enough or something like that, and maybe he comes back and does this thing, but like but like you respect he legitimately believes in sort of like Leto and how Leto is running the house and is a devotee to that, even if like he himself is a little aggressive, right? And isn't quite as
Right.
diplomatic. And all of that came across in like 10 minutes of screen time. I feel like I could do this for every single fucking character, right? So there's like so much depth and detail just in terms of the sort of performances that they got out of this. And this is part of why I'm like, I don't want this to be a prestige TV show because I don't think you get that kind of acting on TV.
No,
Like
so, so
maybe
so I will agree
on
with
like
you. Like
The Sopranos, first Tony Soprano, or like Breaking Bad out of two characters on Breaking Bad or something, right? But like, man, I just like loved it in this movie.
I think in those terms, I think I agree with you. It's a good adaptation, right? Like because like he manages to pack all of that characterization into relatively short amounts of screen time. Um, so I will give you that. Like I said, the only character I think they did poorly was like the only character that I think was very poorly done was Jessica. Like I said, UA also had problems, but it's not a big deal. Yeah, everyone else I think like they did a good job of kind of like keeping mostly the form. Paul's also a little bit less stoic than he is in the book, but like not the end of the
Oh,
world.
really? I really liked Paul. I thought Timothy
Yeah.
Chalamet did a great job.
Oh yeah,
And
no,
obviously, he's one of the best young actors we have working in Hollywood, so that shouldn't surprise anybody. But he nailed it. I also
yeah.
feel like this is kind of like the first like genre thing he's done. I'm trying to think. Like it's not like he's been in fucking Twilight or something, right?
Just pictures just came out of him as Willy Wonka, which like he looks.
Oh, I forgot about that stupid Willy Wonka movie.
He looks pretty good as Wonka. Like just like visually.
Okay, fair
Yeah,
enough.
Paul's also
Yeah.
supposed.
Oh, I remember. Yeah, 2017 was his big year because he was in Lady Bird and Call Me by Your Name, and those are the
Oh,
big
was he the
hits.
kid? Was he the kid in Call Me by Your Name?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
He was the young guy that was boning Army Hammer, who's like hella canceled, right?
is he?
Uh oh yeah.
Uh,
Did you know this?
I don't know
He ended
anything
up.
about Arnie Hammer. All the only thing I know is
I actually really like Army Hammer. I think Army Hammer is great as an actor, right? He's also in The Social Network as the Winklevoss twins, and he's really good in that. But yeah, see, Timothy Chalamet really isn't. He's in Interstellar for like 5 seconds as like the younger version of one of the more important older characters. But this is kind of his first big break into blockbuster filmmaking. Excuse me, I think so.
yeah.
That's something.
Oh, so this is a thing. Just because you reminded me of it, that I think is also bad. But again, like bad adaptation thing is the voice. I think the way they made the voice sound was very good, but like the way that like the voice is much less. You know, I tell you to do a thing and you do it. It's more kind of like I say a thing that like isn't totally unreasonable, and you're like, yeah, why wouldn't I? And like it is used to like it's instead of being like um like a command to like untie her, right? It'll be more like, untie her. And he's like, and then it'll be like, okay, and he kind of does it. It's not like a hard command like it is in the movie, which
Okay.
bothered me a little
I
bit.
did
But
like that. That was something that worked really well in the IMAX, actually, in
no, I agree.
particular. I
I
think a
agree. I
lot of the
agree.
sound was great in this movie just from that I like and that thundering, right? Like I felt you feel it in your bones.
Yeah,
But that's interesting that it is not built
like
to have that sort of function.
I think the audio production for part of it is very good. I just don't think like the act like the kind of like the implementation like the implementation is great. It's supposed to be a little bit more like a force command, right?
Okay.
um
Like the force,
like Star Wars.
okay, yeah, yeah.
um uh
Capital T, capital F force.
yes. um Force suggestion. um like like in Ben, it's like you don't need to see our papers or whatever, right? Like it's like that. um but but it's a very pretty movie. It just it was never going to stack up to the book. It was impossible. It's just like one of those things that books are better at, in some ways. But it's beautiful. It's a very beautiful movie. um Very pretty.
Sure.
um and they put some worms in, which is good. And that was I actually think they did a pretty like they did some like cool wrapping things back in. Like you don't find out that the Emperor's house is named Carino until like the second or third book, and because it's not really important. And they bring that in, and like they like tease the worm riding. I actually thought they were gonna
I thought they were gonna do it. I was pumped for it. I was like, "Oh fuck, this dude's gonna ride a worm, baby! Let's go!"
I
Like,
mean, and I also part of that is I think they made Kynes' death scene better. In the book, they basically capture. First of all, he's a man, which is like whatever. But like, they capture him and they like throw him on the sand and throw down a thumper. And it's basically his death scene is him half delirious arguing with his father in his head. Because in the book, the eco terraforming thing is a plan. Is a plan that him and his dad come up with, not a function of not something that which I also think is a better point. Like I think the kind of they
like
could have
it's ancient machinery or whatever.
or like so the movie implies that like they're the Harkonnens were going to make it into a beautiful planet, and then they were too greedy and they got the spice. In the book, it's just like you know, no one knows there's enough water trapped underneath the sand for like that to be a thing, other than like
Okay.
Heinz and the Fremen. Minor thing, but like and like I said, I think the death seems ultimately better because it's like those kinds is more of a badass. I think it's good. Um, uh,
Yeah, I also
yeah.
think that's good. And I also think it was fucking cool. I was like, if that sandworm doesn't eat somebody, I'm gonna be pissed.
Oh yeah.
And it
Yeah.
fucking
Yeah.
ate a bunch of people. I mean, it ate the big crawler, which was obviously,
Yeah.
cool. Like I liked that introduction of the of the sandworm mechanics scene, which I think like there's a lot of that stuff, right? Like this still suit, there's a lot of like setup and payoff, and it actually reminded me a lot of Mad Max Fury Road in this way, actually, where there's a lot of stuff that's kind of explained or kind of like teased earlier in the movie, and then the thing happens later in the movie and you're like, oh, that makes sense, right? The desert walk, the sand compactor that he uses, right? When they're in that like under the sand tent thing. Um so like all of that stuff, right? I thought that that had good kind of like planting and payoff. And by the time the end of the movie is rolling around, right? Like it's almost all payoff, right? It's just like knocking down dominoes, which is like that good feeling. That's like the Mad Max Fury Road feeling, where it's just like all of the stuff that has been setting up is coming to fruition. It's like you know what the feeling is like. It is like walking back in like WoW to a quest hub, and you have 80 quests to turn in, and you're just turning in all the quests or whatever. It's that kind of feeling at like the end of a movie, which I think helps with sort of the lack of a climax problem, where that feeling kind of creates like this ramping thing, because in the beginning of the movie you're getting some of these, but mostly it's just planting, and then as things are paying off kind of one after another, right? Like it kind of like ups the energy, it feels like, almost, even if the movie itself on a like a raw plot level isn't necessarily like justifying that, right? And I think there is, for instance, I think that there's a better way that they do sort of the literalizing of Paul killing that guy, right? As being this kind of climactic moment where he kills the guy, he sort of takes a life for the first time, and that's the sort of completion of his arc or whatever. And we move into chapter 2, and that was maybe a little bit more satisfying, but at the end of the
Yeah.
day.
No, and I think they actually did something like super well there too, which is like I don't know how obvious it was, but like the fact that like he kills he kills him instead of being killed, or like the other alternative, which is like he becomes his teacher for the in the desert, right? Like kind of like starts
So
to
those are the visions that he has,
yeah,
right?
yeah, right.
Yeah,
Like,
okay,
and
yeah.
this is an important kind of like thing, is that like he can see things that like he says it kind of outright. He's like, do these things come true? He's like, not exactly, right? Like the fact that like the paths kind of diverge and come back together, and um like the big thing in the book is like, and this is his like freak out in the tent, right? Is like kind of like this endless jihad that happens, and he's just like trying to like keep it under control so it doesn't go too off the rails, right? um and like that's like the through line of like the series, is like is the kind of like the eternal jihad that has to be like directed in a way that's like not super destructive, and not
Oh my
super.
god, that's crazy. That's a lot like Foundation, actually. Do you know the premise of Foundation?
I think you went over it last time, but why don't you
Yeah,
tell
so
or guess again?
the premise of Foundation is that there is this new science called psychohistory, which is essentially operating on the principle that like an individual person is quite erratic in when it comes to decision making, but the more people you get in a room, kind of becomes statistically possible to predict their behavior, because they become more and more predictable as the size gets greater and greater. It's kind of like how you or me might come to individual conclusions about how to vote in an election, but Nate Silver can predict the outcome of an election based on the statistics of whatever this shit is, right? And like doing that kind of shit with probability, right?
Yeah, like
Obviously, that's
it's
not what
like
Nate Silver is doing or whatever, but like
uh,
that's the fundamental
th-
principle of psychohistory and Foundation.
there's like I think maybe a little bit more concrete example is like once you get above like 30ish people, you like the chance of you having two people with the same birthday is like very very high, even though you
Oh
wouldn't
yeah,
think.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and so there's this guy Hari Seldon who is like the universe's, actually it's just a galaxy, the galaxy's foremost expert on psychohistory, and he is in, I think it's called Tarantis, which is like um the cow, it's like the Coruscant, right? It's this giant planet-wide city, right? At the heart of the Galactic Empire, and he realizes that the Galactic Empire is teetering on the edge of collapse, right? It is about to collapse. And he does all the psychohistorical math and finds out that there's going to be 30 years of barbaric bloodshed and war, right? Where just the galaxy, or I'm sorry, 30,000 years of barbaric bloodshed and war, where the universe is just plunged into raw, unending carnage, right? Um, as the empire breaks up into warlords or whatever before true kind of stability returns. And he also does the math to figure out that if there is one group of psychohistorians on the very outer edges of the empire, but that can, like that can influence things, right? That they will be able to shorten that period from 1,000 years to, or from 30,000 years to 1,000 years, right? And so it is about setting up this group. This group is called the Foundation, by the way. It is about setting up this group such that that group can keep the universe from just falling into endless unceasing bloodshed, right? And so that's very similar to Dune, it sounds like, right? Kind of trying to keep the eternal jihad from happening and trying to keep kind of like that collapse,
Uh,
that imperial collapse from happening.
so the difference here is that it's all on Paul, right? Like
Yeah.
Paul sees this, and Paul sees that he can like that like he can like veer into like tyranny or veer into like like he can also get himself killed, right? But like he can like
Mhm.
maybe keep things in balance, and then in the later books this is like his son picks it up, and it's the golden path, and that's where the weird stuff comes in. That's like where like the real weird stuff comes in. Like this is
Okay. Yeah,
the
something similar happens. Well, because Foundation, because it's 1,000 years, right? No single person is about that. So you check in with people, right? So my favorite character is Salvor Hardin in the first book, who is the first mayor of the Foundation, because the Foundation has mayors. Um, and Salvor Hardin actually isn't a psychohistorian. He's just literally a raw politician, but he's like smart enough, and he tricks the Empire into some stuff, and is just like a very cool, awesome guy. So that's why Foundation, because it takes place over the course of that 1,000 year gap, you check in with a bunch of different psychohistorians who are each kind of, doing their own thing, right? The second book is called Foundation and Empire, which is actually my favorite one. But Foundation and Empire then goes into Second Foundation, which is like a whole nother thing, because you find out that there's one mutant that gets born, and psychohistory can't account for anomalies like that, right? So this mutant gets born, and he can control minds. Like he can tell you to do a thing and you will do it. And he completely throws the whole formula, the Foundation equation that Salvor Hardin made, out of whack. And then they have to make a second foundation that gets everything back on track. So this is all the drama, right? But that's a very that's a very like core science fiction premise that I
I,
think is that I think is very cool.
I was gonna say like that. So that sounds very similar. There's a short Philip K. Dick story about a like essentially they're doing the same prediction engine thing, right? And like it's basically two sides like building up to war, and like neither one will go until like their readouts say that they're gonna win, and it keeps like
Mhm.
teetering back and forth. And then like unrelated, a time like a what was it like they go like they also are like doing like time research, like there's like people that go back in time and like research things, and they need it for something, so they pull it forward too fast, and they end up pulling in like a handyman from like the mid ninth or mid 20th century, and like people are too like specialized in the far flung future, and he can just kind of like jury rig stuff, and so like he like screws everything up, and it's like that's like it's a weird short story. Phil K. Dick is very
Yeah.
weird. I've been over this
Yeah, I
before.
mean, Foundation also has that say it eventually gets a little crazy. I think like the fifth book is called Foundation and Earth, where they realize that they need to find the birthplace of the Galactic Empire, which is Earth, right? Which obviously you and I understand what Earth is, right? But it's actually kind of funny because it's almost like it's like an archaeology dig. It's like an Indiana Jones movie, but where the subject is the planet Earth, which you and I are very well aware of, right? Like there's one part where they realize that the thing that was crazy about Earth that they can use to identify where Earth was the presence of the moon, right? And how the size of our moon relative to the size of our planet is actually pretty unique overall, right? And that could be like a determining factor. And so, but yeah, anyway, yeah, I guess science fiction stories go off the rails later in their lives. Who know? I don't know how we
Hey,
got into this.
I've been on the Mango's Iron Law of world building. Anything
Yep,
that goes on long enough will become stupid. Um,
absolutely. That is the ironclad law of world building. I absolutely
um,
agree.
but yeah, uh,
Okay, so
back to
when
the
it comes
movie.
to back to Dune, back on point. Okay, so when it comes to Dune 2, are you like hyped for Dune 2? Does Dune 1 give you faith that Dune 2 will be, made well? Like, do you think that the movie will only be complete when you could view the entire thing as one 8 hour epic or whatever it ends up being? I guess it was only 2.5 hours, one 5 hour epic, right?
So I am confident that Dune 2 will be good, but I'm also pretty confident that I will not enjoy it super much, and because of my hangups about the book. But
Okay.
yes, maybe it'll be long enough in the future that I'll have forgotten most of Dune. And
Yeah, I mean, they haven't filmed it yet, right? So I think they
they
only
have they really
confirmed.
not filmed it? I can't believe they
My
have.
understanding is they only confirmed that it's happening like a couple of days ago, right?
Okay,
Where I think they greenlit it based on its performance, which it did reasonably well.
yeah,
Better
this is
than.
good because like you need a time skip for like some point, right? Like because
Oh, really?
like Paul like goes out into the desert, and it's like a couple years later that like
Interesting.
they take
Okay.
back Arrakis. Yeah, um, there's a bunch of weird stuff that'll happen. Um,
Can I just ask a really basic world building question?
yeah,
How does spice make interstellar travels possible if the only place to get it is Arrakis,
they ship it
and
off.
Arrakis. No, 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 no. How did they interstellarly travel to Arrakis to get spice in the first place?
I don't think that's ever quite explained. Maybe they do it like the slow way first. So essentially, what it is that like the spice gives everyone a little bit of prescience, right?
Okay.
Like Paul is very good at it, right? And he's like exceptional, and that's why it works out. But like the navigators, like basically, this is where again things get it weird. Like you don't really see them for a while, but the navigators like, basically are like weird bulbous people that like live in like tanks of spice, and it gives them enough prescience that they can like see like the paths to go without like crashing into anything. Um,
Okay.
you know how kind of like in Star Wars you have to like calculate the hyper like
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You
like
have a computer to
yeah you have to
do
calculate the route, right? This is like the original in the original Kessel run, like pre reset, right? Like it's a short distance because he kind of like recklessly like makes the jump without making the full calculations.
yeah, and
um
you were flying near black holes. That's the original
yeah
Kessel Run,
yeah
right?
yeah
And it is as short as close to the black holes as you can without getting sucked in.
right yeah so it's
Man,
but
God,
yeah
what a reference.
yeah
Man, can you there hasn't been a Star Wars movie since The Rise of Skywalker in 2019,
no
right?
there has not. There's been the
That's
second
weird.
season of the Mandalorian, or both seasons
I
of the
guess that's
Mandalorian.
true. Yep, there were both seasons of The Mandalorian. Did you ever even watch the second
I
season?
have not yet. I need to. I know.
We'll do. I mean, when the third season starts debuting at some point in the not too distant future, I'm sure we'll do like a catch up episode.
Yeah.
Um. Okay, that's interesting. Okay. Uh.
But how did they find
uh
it in the first place? I don't. It's not explained in the books. But it's or it's not explained in the books that I have read so far. Um. Oh,
oh, on
the
that point, my understanding is that AI used to handle
right.
navigation
That would
before
make
they had
sense.
spice. That would make sense.
Pre jihad. Right. Yeah, that would make
Okay,
sense.
sure.
Pre Butlerian jihad, which is a different jihad. This is a minor quibble, right? Like they kind of seems like they studiously avoid using the word jihad for the most part in the movie. Um,
Yeah, I did get the kind of there was a
there's a lot of Arabic influence in the book, right? Like a lot of
Yeah.
stuff is like, like it's, this is like a little bit exotic and a little bit mysterious, right? It's like 60s America, right? Like the Herbert's writing for. It's like a little bit of Lawrence of Arabia ish, right? Type stuff.
Mm,
Um uh
yeah, that makes sense.
uh
Okay. Are there any characters in the second book that we haven't met, or in the second film that you expect we haven't like met by now?
I mean, we haven't really done a lot with Channy. Um there's interesting stuff that I don't.
Chani is Zendaya, right? Is
Yes,
the
yeah,
girl? Okay.
yeah. Um so there's how much do you care about spoilers?
I don't care about spoilers, and I'm really interested in where this goes
Okay.
next.
So these are like very minor things, but like there's uh Paul's sister who we find out about in this movie because Jessica's pregnant with her.
Okay.
There's so this is the thing that I'm almost positive we're going to cut. Javis has kids and a wife, and by Fremen tradition, Paul inherits them. Which yeah.
Ooh, that's problematic.
Yeah, yeah.
That, honestly, maybe you could pull it off. A similar sort of thing happened in The Last Samurai, right? But where it is less an inheritance and more a, like you have to do right by the man you killed kind of thing, right?
Yeah, yeah. That is essentially what it is. But like, there's also like, Paul also is with like Chenny is his love interest, right? Like this is the big kind of political point. That like this is like a mirror of what happens with Jessica and Leto, right? Like Paul eventually gets married to one of the daughters of the emperor, but he doesn't love her and he doesn't care about her. And like this is a plot point in the second book. Is he like refuses to fuck her, and she's like, I want a kid, fucking like sleep with me, and he's like, no, Channy is my wife, or Channy, you are only my wife because I need to like have a valid claim to the throne. Fuck you. And like the second book is like a plot to overthrow Paul, and it very kind of sort of succeeds. It's it starts to get weird, right? Like Dune is a very classic coming of age book in a lot of ways, and like Paul escapes most of Dune, the book, intact as like a pretty decent person, and like things very quickly start going weird past the first book.
Okay.
It's still very good, just like weird. I have had several people say to me, Lou and Hyperindexed included, that like things are not good after the fourth book. But he also like so Frank Herbert writes 6 books, and then his son he passes away, and his son starts writing books. And the way I've heard it described to me is his son writes it much more like a traditional kind of like action sci-fi, whereas like the original Dune books are very cerebral and political thrillers and nuanced, and like people really don't like, a lot of people really don't like the son's books. But
Okay.
yeah. So Lou explains, discovering spice made space travel safer and faster, but they had it before then. AI navigators had slower speeds, maybe even FTL, rather than crazy warp shit. Yeah, like this is the thing, is like if you read these books, you see like kind of like the tendrils of this, like like what it inspired, right? Like the voice is like the force suggestion, right? Like the spice is kind of like the warp, right? Like all this stuff, which is it's cool, right? Like it's cool to see kind of like oh, I recognize
Honestly,
that.
it is cool to see sort of the space empire like bear fruit in a way,
Yeah,
because like this is something that was also true of Foundation, right? That I really loved, was like the idea that there's this great, Isaac Asimov wrote that book because he read The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. Like he read that book and he was like, wouldn't it be fucking cool to do this in space, right? Um, and it is cool to do that in space, obviously, but like in Foundation, you never really get to see the Empire do its thing, I guess, if that makes sense, right? Like it is just always in a state of collapse because the book starts with Salvor Hardin's prediction that there will be 30,000 years of barbarism without the Foundation, right? Um and I almost sort of feel like Dune is almost kind of like an answer to that need that, because Foundation is in the 50s, right? Dune is in the 60s, is that right?
oh, that's it. Yeah, that's interesting, because like up to 4 is like up until like there is like a similar kind of like collapse that happens around the end of the fourth book.
Oh,
um
okay, interesting.
yeah. it's called the Scattering, and there's a whole thing. But that's super interesting, right? Like the fourth book is God Emperor of Dune, which is where I think that's where 40K gets
40K gets it. I had really hardcore 40K vibes, to be honest.
yeah.
And I was thinking about that. And like it's interesting to me that like 40K, and also I've been thinking about this a lot when it comes to Warhammer Fantasy, right? Like um this is kind of like a bigger idea or topic or whatever. Okay, so to unpack this a little, something that you'll hear people say about Warcraft, right, is that they wish Warcraft lore was written like Hearthstone lore, right? Because Hearthstone is fun and it's fluffy or whatever.
Right.
And it kind of tells these like very, like right now it's United in Stormwind, which includes Katrana Prestor, right, who is a Nixia in a human disguise, influencing the 5-year-old Anduin Wrynn and High Lord Bolvar for Dragon before he becomes the Lich King, all this other stuff or whatever, right? And I had a very popular post on Reddit recently where I kind of said that the reason the reasons that is successful is because WoW kind of does the groundwork for it, right? You need WoW to sort of break new ground in the story in order for Hearthstone to then go back and sort of remix it, right? So for instance, one of the core classes in Hearthstone now is Demon Hunter, right? And the new experience is that there are these 10 characters and there are sort of and one of them is named Kurtrus Ashfallen and he's a night elf demon hunter or whatever, and he's kind of part of this core group. But like that's an innovation from Legion, right? Demon Hunters were written out of the story as soon as Burning Crusade and only got reintroduced like way later down the line. So like Hearthstone needs WoW for that kind of thing. But anyway, somebody mentioned Warhammer in that line where Warhammer is a world that doesn't really have anybody like pushing real story forward, but the lore is kind of constantly expanding and growing over time, right? In modern times, that is Total War Warhammer 3 is now putting an army down for Kislev. It's putting an army down for Grand Cathay. And we're learning all of these interactions of, right, like the Warhammer universe in places that were only like whispers, right?
The
Because
tabletop.
there just never was a Kislevite army. There was never a Cathay army. We just understood those characters kind of by like mention and happenstance. And I sort of am interested in that idea, right? Where it's like, where does story end and lore begin? Right? If that makes sense.
Yeah, no,
And I kind of
it
almost
does.
feel like that's sort of like 40K doesn't really have a story, but it does have a lot of lore, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting because this is something people talk about because like the plot barely ever advanced, like the main plot, right? Like where you are present in the present of the game, right? Like never really advances because like it's not in Games Workshop's interest, right? Because like you don't want to resolve anything, you need to leave everything open ended. But like
Yeah.
things basically expand backwards and sideways, right? Like like you get like more details of the lore of the past, right? Like and you get stories about like the Horus Heresy, but like that is more important as its lore than it is as the story of that happening, right? Like the novelization, right? Like the novelization is apparently good to read and fun, but like the important thing is like the lore implications of that, which is like on the flip side would be something like Dune has good story, right? Like you can follow like Paul to Leto to I'm not sure what happens past it. Um, Duncan Idaho apparently appears in all 6 books. This is he will probably not appear in Dune 2 unless they change something around. But like Duncan Idaho is like the original Boba Fett. Speaking of influences,
Whoa.
yeah, um, it's Do you want to know?
Sure.
It's fun.
Yeah. Hit
So
me.
so in the second book, they it's like a new it's not a new faction, but like it's new to the story faction. I forget what the name of them are called, but they basically they have Duncan Idaho's body and they make a Gola out of him, which is basically like an artificial version of him.
Okay.
And they send him to Paul as part of this plot to like overthrow him. And the Gola's name is Hate, Hayt, but it's played as like like it's like a double entendre or whatever. And he's like he doesn't have a lot of like his own motivations, but like or like he does. But he's like I kind of sort of remember who I was, and I was told who I was, but I'm not him, right? And then something basically forces him to take action against Paul, and that's when he like snaps into. He's like, oh, I remember who I was. He like snaps back into it, and so he becomes Duncan Idaho again. Um,
Wow. Okay.
so and then that particular one goes into the third book, and he dies in the third book. In the fourth book, it is like a big time skip forward, like several thousand years forward, right?
Well,
And God Emperor of Dune, Leto 2, who is like Paul's son, and like at 12 years old, he like slaps a bunch of sandworm, like baby sandworms on him and becomes a sandworm. It's weird. Um, in that one, he's like become mostly a sandworm. He's the God Emperor of Dune, and he like will every like 40 years or so, because that's around the time that he needs to replace them, will order a new Duncan Idaho. And they have created fake Pauls to drive the Idahos into this reflex where they remember who they are. Yeah, yeah.
wow.
Yeah, this very emotional moment in the second book where like I think it's the second book, where yeah, it must be the second book where he like remembers who he is because of his loyalty to Paul. Gets basically like mechanized and like productionalized in the fourth book. So like,
Have you ever seen the Simple Rick episode of Rick and Morty?
I don't think so. I stopped watching it for like
There's an
seconds.
episode of Rick and Morty where they go back to that one like place where it's all the Ricks and Mortys from all the different universes, right? And it's this society, and in that society there is a there's a factory for a like a granola bar, actually more like one of those like wafer cookie bar things, right? And it's called Simple Ricks, right? Like the Simple Ricks wafer cookie or whatever. And there's a commercial that plays like in the beginning of the episode, and the commercial's like, you know, do you ever wish that you hadn't discovered portal technology and gone to different dimensions and instead just stayed home and played with your daughter? Well, we found the Rick who did that, and we extract the juice his brain makes, and it's Simple Rick's juice, and that's what you're eating every time you bite into a Simple Rick, right? So they like chemically induce this feeling of like being, you know, being like, oh, like a simple guy or whatever. And then later in the episode, a factory worker at Simple Rick's decides that his life is fucking bullshit, and he holds Simple Rick hostage. And a bunch of Rick police officers show up, and this whole thing plays out where he's in a hostage situation. He's holding Simple Rick hostage. He kills Simple Rick, and he escapes in a daring thing because he's finally found freedom. But then you find out that no, he actually got tasered by the cops, and the cops put him in the Simple Rick machine. So now all the Ricks can eat the flavor of rebelling against the system and, you know, like becoming a free person or whatever. Woof. That is what that reminds
That
me
sounds
of.
like a Brazil reference.
Oh, it actually does sound like a Brazil reference. Yeah, I just like the idea of like mechanizing, right? Like that
Oh
kind of
yeah, yeah.
emotional moment. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely.
Oh,
But yes, no, it you know things get weird at the end of at the end of Dune, and you could keep doing this. You need like a different actor for Dune 2. That or you need to wait like 20 years for Timothy Chalamet to age up. Uh, and but yeah, I think you'd want to just get somebody else that way you can keep having Jason Momoa being Duncan Idaho. Uh, I don't know.
yeah.
I kind of expect them to like turn this into a cinematic universe, which at that point it might be a problem, but we'll see. We'll see. We'll see if they like. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe they don't do a second movie or a second. Not a second movie, but like the second book and the third book. Because the second and third book you can kind of do as one continuous thing.
Okay.
That are doing it as like two parts, like two movies, right? Like you don't need as much. Like obviously you don't get as much depth, but like it kind of like they kind of. I think the second and third books only work as a pair. Like I don't think the second book is very good until you get to the third book and you get the reflection. Um, but yeah, maybe that's just me. Um, but yeah,
Okay.
but yeah. That's you have anything else you want to say about Dune?
I just want to say that Denis Villeneuve bats 1,000. This dude doesn't miss, which is crazy, right? You know, even I don't know, even like the best directors out there that I can think of, like the best modern directors we have working, have had duds, right? And have had things that I just don't think are like just don't work. And it's nuts that he's killing it every single time. And maybe the part of this is, I think part of this is that Dune is also my kind of story, right? It's very melodramatic, it's very over the top, it's very scenery chewing, like all of that kind of stuff, right? There is no lack of sincerity. There is not a single line in here that is like the typical making fun of, you know,
Dark.
making fun of the source material line. Like
Yeah.
there's no Marvel humor in this or whatever. And I like, and this is, it's just played dead straight. It's just, and that's the kind of thing that will like obviously I don't know, appealed to me
I think we're moving
as an
back into that,
individual.
like as like a society. I think we're moving back towards earnestness, right? Like
Yeah.
like
Oh, I read a review. I shouldn't have done this because
oh,
I
is
don't
it
do this, but
Eternals?
yeah, I read a review of Eternals about this very thing, which I'm sure we'll talk. Is that next week or is that the week
It's
after?
soon. It's like early November.
Holy fuck. It is. So, yeah, it is next Friday. I
Oh,
think it's Eternals and The Matrix on the same day.
I thought
One of which I care a lot about. The other one,
Matrix is December, isn't it?
is it? I thought Matrix was
Uh,
also November. Oh, I'm sorry. I could be wrong about that.
I think there is another movie in there somewhere. Um,
Matrix 4. Nope, you're correct. December 22nd. Wow, I guess I just completely fucked up. I thought that was just I thought Eternals and Matrix were coming out the same day, but I
so
guess
so
I'm
I have an idea. I'm gonna pitch this
okay.
right now. I
Sure.
say December is Matrix month, and we do all 4 Matrix movies in December.
Okay, I'm down for that. Man, I recently watched a video essay on the Matrix sequels. I may have talked about this last time. I watched a video
Yeah.
essay on the Matrix sequels, and it was like the Matrix sequels are good actually, but I feel like they were like wrong about everything. And but like I still do believe the Matrix sequels are actually really good. But it was just like frustrating to see somebody making your point, but like in a way that I think is
Oh
kind
yeah,
of bad.
yeah. No, it's there's
Or I don't want to say kind of bad, just that it was I don't know, like what it was made by these two trans YouTubers, and so it was all about sort of the trans experience, right? Like one of the points that they made is that actually Neo and Trinity's relationship is a lesbian relationship, and that Neo is coded as female. And I was just like, what? Are you kidding? Right? Like, I know. I was just like, I was sitting there. I was like, how can we possibly be doing this right now? Like, Jesus fucking Christ. Um, anyway. uh,
Yeah, so but just to kind of like close out the Dune stuff before we get into our weeks, I would recommend to people at home that if you really like this movie, like I think it's a good movie. Don't read the book until the second movie comes out,
okay.
because like and then go read the book. It's a very good book, but preserve your innocence. Just because like I wish I could view it without like the not really the baggage, but like knowing the book and liking the book so much. Um, and then you could go back and read the book and really enjoy the book because you'll be like going from one to the other, and you'll have like these like there's also like little stuff that like is like weird in here, right? Like I like these are very minor niggly complaints, right? But like um, I listen to them on Audible, and the Audible people pronounce ch, and so like that's just like like that's not a criticism of the
Mm,
movie. That's just like a thing that like bothers me.
sure.
And this is really nitpicky, but like they call like in the movie they call it the desert walk. It's walking without rhythm, which I like much more as a much more poetic way of saying it. And like again, not a thing that I'm like willing to like fucking burn down the movie over, but like it's like but like it's a thing you can appreciate again when it's over. But I would say I would if for people at home wait until the second movie comes out, watch the second movie, and then read the book. Um,
Okay, sounds good.
um, and if you can't wait, I would say read all the way through God Emperor of Dune, because that's what I did, and I think it's good. And you'll be able to like see like at that point you get like the little things. I think right. So um,
All right. Well, so how was your week? What else did you do besides Dune? I guess your week was super busy, right?
it's been 2 weeks.
Oh God, you're right. That's true.
So on the plane, I had to fly to San Francisco and back. I played a bunch of Metroid Dread. Oh well, first I
How was that?
let me talk about another game I played. I played it in Beat, which is not Beat Dread. I played a little game called Behind the Frame on my cell phone, which was it's a Nakapara game for people who don't know. It
Hmm.
was very good. Um, it is very, 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 very pretty. It is like gorgeously animated. It is. I was. my initial thought was like it's short, right? It's a
Mhm.
puzzle adventure game. And I like it's in kind of like the games as consumer product model. It's maybe a little on the smart side for that, but the more I think about it, the more I like how clever it is. Um, I think
I
part.
that was the thing for I okay, so, when we were first signing Behind the Frame, what we do, right, whenever we're thinking about designing a game, we'll demo what they have, right, and kind of give feedback, right? And so I played through the first, like, chapter or whatever it's called of Behind the Frame, which is all they had done at the time. And I was really mean. I was like, "Oh, this is so like I know exactly where this is going. It's super predictable. The puzzles are incredibly easy or whatever else." And I was like really mean to this game. And then they came back like 2 months later and they said, "Okay, well, here's actually the full experience, right? It's probably buggy, it's not polished, but it's content complete, right?" And we were like, "Okay, well, we'll play through it again." And I played through it the second time. I was like, I thought I knew where this was going. It was not going there at all. Are you kidding? I was so wrong. And it was like a really nice feeling actually to be kind of like bamboozled in that way. And it was also, I didn't quite have when I played the first chapter, right? You don't quite have a sense for how the puzzles kind of grow on one another, which is really fun. And I got into it. The second time I played through, I was like, oh wait, this is actually awesome. And it's slam dunk. But it was pretty funny how negative I was the first time I played Behind the Frame.
And it's like I don't want to say too much about it because like the the kind of like way the story goes is one very beautiful, two very heart touching, and three very clever, very clever. Like 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 you like at some point I was like I think I know where this is going, and then like it's like I guess maybe not, and then like when like it took me a little while to like get the whole thing to dawn on me like oh that's what and it's pretty great. I can recommend it with like without like again like on the consumer model part like the only thing that it's like it's not a long game, so if you need to ration
If
your
you really
game on
value your 5 or 10 bucks or whatever it is,
yeah
yeah.
if you need to rush if you need good dollar to hour ratio, maybe this isn't it, but like I think it's worth skipping a couple of Starbucks coffees for, if that makes sense. Or what
Yep.
was your thing? Skipping like eating ramen out of the dollar ramen instead of like getting lunch at at the cafe or whatever. Like
Absolutely. Yep.
I think it's worth that level of sacrifice.
Yeah.
And well done, excellent job.
Okay, and then you played Metroid Dread. Let me
Yes,
play that.
I've played a bunch of Metroid Dread. By my hearing of discussions, I think plot wise, I'm like 2/3 to 75% of the way through it. I could
Okay.
be wrong about that. And it's a very good Metroidvania, right? Like it's a great Metroid game. It kind of ticks all the boxes. The only thing that bothers me a little bit is the loading times are a bit long. So if you're like going between zones, there's like a good like feels like 30 seconds or so at least to load between zones, and like in these kind of games where like you need to go back and like go through areas that uh, um go through areas that you went through before, and like use your unlocked powers on them. If it can be a little infuriating at times, especially if like you go to do something, you realize you have to go back. It's like it's like back to back loading screens are not great, but um, otherwise I think it's great. It's just a very solid Metroid game. Controls are tight. Um, there's a couple little like the angled shooting is like not a thing I'm easy. It's like I have trouble like doing like sometimes you need to do like three or four things at once, and I don't always get my hands right on that, and I think it's a little bit overloaded. Um, like you can like aim while you're running, but like it's the left stick to it is like
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about.
yeah it's tough.
I played a game recently like that. It was a precision platformer, which I will not name because I am about to roast it. It's a precision platformer, and one of the mechanics is you have jump, right, and then you also have attacks, right, and so you have a sideways attack, an up attack, and a down attack, and the down attack is kind of like a spike in like Smash Brothers, right? And one of the core mechanics of the game is that you can bounce off of spikes by down attacking them, right? So you down attack a spike, you go bounce, bounce, bounce. Otherwise, you hit the spike and you die. And there are parts in the platforming where you have to chain these down attack bounces to move forward, right? But the thing is that the game doesn't know like the game doesn't recognize momentum unless you are holding the left stick to the right, right? Which you also like if you stop holding the left stick, you immediately lose your momentum, even if you're in the middle of it, like the middle of the air, right? Which is a huge problem because when you need to trigger the bounce, right,
You need
you
to aim
need
a
to do a
stick
down
down.
attack
Yeah.
and then you need to move to the right again, right? And so like you sometimes get in these situations where like the bounce you're trying to do the bounce but then you're just doing a sideways swipe because you're not quite
Like
down
you're
enough.
down right and like you're not quite down enough to
Yeah,
get a trigger.
or and this is the one that killed me, is you execute the bounce, right? But you don't have enough rightward momentum that you can complete the jump in whatever. And it's just like I wanted to rip my eyeballs out. I fucking hated it. It was like the worst experience. But I think those kinds honestly, those kinds of mechanics issues, like controls issues have definitely sank games for me before. So
Yeah. And
I feel the frustration.
it's not terrible in Tread. I don't want to be like this is like a deal breaker or whatever. It's just like there's
Sure.
like one boss fight in particular that I'm thinking of. It's like you need to like do like 2 or 3 mechanics in sequence, and it wasn't too bad. Like once I had done it a couple of times, it was like the first couple. It's like, oh, I need to like do this. Like I need to do these 3 things, and like if I press one button wrong, the thing will go off wrong, and like the timing window will like close. And like you'll have to like do a cycle again on the boss. Wasn't too bad. Um, but you know it's just tough. But it's a very good game, very very good game. The other well, why don't you talk about some of the stuff that you did, and I can talk about the other stuff.
Man, I feel like I've done a lot. Well, so the big thing that came out is Hearthstone Mercenaries, right, which debuted 2 weeks ago at this point, which is the like the Warcraft gotcha game. So it honestly it feels like Pokemon to me, right? Like it just feels like it's a little bit simpler than Pokemon in the sense that you know, you don't have any overarching narrative really. Like there is a narrative, but like mostly it is just going kind of fight to fight to fight. There's no overworld or moving through anything or anything like that. And then you're getting your guys and you're leveling up your guys and you're doing your stuff with your guys. But it is kind of like just the perfect game. I said this is the perfect game to disassociate to, which is like very true. And has completely replaced New World actually in that vein, right? Where I spent a bunch of time in New World just like sitting there fucking farming trees and watching number go up. I am now doing that exact same thing, but in Mercenaries, watching number go up as I am, you know, progressing through these bounties. There's a little bit of a PvP mode. Actually, not even a little bit. There's a lot of a PvP mode. I just don't touch it. I I don't know. I would be happy to, I guess, and I kind of want to like get in there at some point, but I've read a lot of it honestly kind of got super meta ties because there's already a really good structure for like defining a meta in Hearthstone when it comes to the card game, obviously, right? So the mercenaries meta kind of got solved immediately. It feels like on day one, which like immediately turned me off to playing that game mode. Though I'm sure it's good stuff. I hear from people that it's good stuff and that it's fun. Though people are really mad because Blizzard nerfed the way that people were just like sitting there and fucking hard grinding uh like missions to upgrade their guys or whatever. Um which I don't know. That was funny. But other than that, I've been playing a lot of WoW, a lot of Vermintide. I've gotten back into Total War Warhammer 2 because Total War Warhammer 3 content uh is like now being dropped. Yeah, Nature Chain is my perfect life, the combo life. I have seen that. It's Malfurion Brucon um Guff, right? That's like the really powerful opener. I've seen people do that on Twitter. There's a lot of like just wrecking people with that nature combo. Yep. So you know, I don't know that stuff. I gotta say one thing. I am insanely pumped for Warhammer 3. Like the stuff that they're releasing now, which is like very specific, like campaign mechanics of the different factions, is really interesting. And I think that it's kind of crazy to say this, but I feel like they're successfully one upping Total War Warhammer 2, which I felt was honestly like pretty pushed at the end of it, right? But they're doing this thing with so for instance, they just revealed Tzeentch's um campaign mechanics. Tzeentch is famously the chaos god of like deceit and trickery and manipulation, right? Um And Sinch, his whole thing is that you can basically force other factions to do things diplomatically that they would otherwise not do, right? Like, and you can kind of spend a currency in order to make moves on their campaign map, which is like maybe the most insane thing I've ever seen in a 4X game ever in my entire life,
That
right?
sounds
Where
like
I
it'd
can
be super hard to balance.
I imagine it will be hard to balance. Yeah, so there's like that you can force one army to go to you can force one faction to go to war with another faction and then tell one of their armies to attack one of the other faction cities. And you can do just like all of this kind of stuff with like break it. You can force two different factions to break alliances. You can force one faction to lose a settlement and have that settlement go to another faction. It's I don't know, man. It's crazy.
That's like Singe is my favorite chaos god. Um, so like that sounds nuts. I would love to give that a trip. I don't understand like how they're gonna do that. But
I imagine that the balance is going to be the currency, right? That you're going to need, and I think it's also locked behind technology. So like you research certain technologies, and you have to spend a certain amount of currency in order to activate the thing, which is whatever. I mean, it's funny because I actually predicted a Skaven mechanic a long time ago when in the Total War Warhammer 1 days. I talked about I was like, wouldn't it be cool if the Skaven had a thing where they could go into a movable ambush stance, right? Where they run around and they can ambush somebody, you know, in battle. And I remember I looked at that thread, which is like 5 years ago at this point. I looked at that thread and everybody was like, "Oh, that'd be so broken. That'd be so OP. There'd have to be all of these modifiers." And we were all like, "Yeah, you wouldn't be able to do this. You'd have to have that. Like all this stuff." And then Total War Warhammer 2 launches with that mechanic and none of the punishments, right? It is just that good, right? Like if you pump your ambush success chance, every time you fight an enemy army in the field, it's gonna be an ambush. That's just how it works. Which like honestly feels good. I guess it's because it's a single player game, I can kind of get away with it, but yeah.
yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
I'm surprised to hear Siege is your favorite. Well, like why?
Uh, he's like the Justice Plan guy. I don't know.
Okay, I guess that's fair.
He's fun. Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
like also like who else would it be, right? Like
I've always loved corn.
okay.
Blood. They released the corn campaign mechanics today. The reason I love corn honestly is because in the very first introduction to the Warhammer universe, which was a WFRP Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay game, the whole purpose of that right was like you were discovering this cult of corn that was like secretly in Middenheim, right? Like this one um imperial city or whatever. And there was one moment that I thought was really fucking funny where our characters like infiltrated a shrine to corn underneath this like whatever this place or whatever. And this was all being run out of a book and our GM showed us the book. And in the book there's a trap that goes off and the trap went off and it hit us for a gazillion damage, right? Warhammer is a very brutal system when it comes to this. And he's like, they included this note in the book, and I'm like, who the fuck would do this? And the note was because it's a shrine to corn. When you're on the stair, when you're essentially in the square before entering the shrine, you have to utter a small prayer to corn in order to cause the trap not to go off. So like you have to walk into the shrine and go blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne, right? But like no, like why would they even include that? Nobody would ever do that, right? And ever since then, Corn has always been my favorite Chaos God. Just because I honestly think Blood for the Blood God and Skulls for the Skull Throne is a really baller thing to say, and he's just a badass, and all of his guys are badasses, and that's sweet. That's fun. Like,
Milk for the cornflakes.
yeah. Milk cornflakes. What was it? The thing that Kyle tweeted me? Poo poo pee pee for the poo poo pee pee monster. Oh,
Yeah. I mean, that feels like the type of thing that you would put in the description, so like it's like a diegetic explanation as to like why like it doesn't go off
yeah.
for like the people, right? So like
Yeah, I mean it is like a nice little note, but it's just funny. God, man, I yeah, the core campaign mechanics in Warhammer 3 are also like honestly a little bit nuts and sort of brutal. His unique resource is just skulls, right? But Korn's thing is he can yeah, right. He can like order things to so when Korn raises a city, he creates a new army called a blood host, which is just like a ravenous army that can't replenish and that goes and just fights shit all on its own. But you can obviously chain that together because when a blood host army raises a settlement, it creates another blood host army, right? And you can apparently get in these chain reactions where your main army creates a blood host and that thing immediately goes and it creates a blood host and it's just like going and spawning these armies of like Cornite guys or whatever doing all this stuff. There's a thing with Corn where he can just straight he can get into a stance, right? You take your army, you walk into a territory and you enter a stance where you don't move for a few turns. You just have to stay still. And after a couple of turns, the settlement just blows up and a blood host army spawns. You just like auto raise the settlement, which is nuts. And there's also
That
crazy teleportation bullshit as well because one of the mechanics for chaos is you can create cults in cities of like
enemy
in
factions.
a dwarf city, right? I can make a Cornite cult and you can make buildings with that or whatever. And one of the corn buildings is like the Grand Arena, and a corn army can teleport to any city that has a Grand Arena in it and attack it, not for free, but for currency, right? So it's just like it's just about fucking dudes up. What's not to love?
No, that makes sense. That's not like it sounds like an attempt to do like WA 2.0 because they had to like pretty heavily modify the original WA mechanics for the orcs, right?
Yeah,
Like
the new WoW mechanic is not, and it is actually pretty cool because they have changed the way that these different factions all kind of experience that same kind of aggression, right? Like the WoW is targeted, right? You say this is a WoW on Altdorf, and now you have 20 turns to go march your massive orc WoW across the empire, raising everything until you get to Altdorf and you raise it or you sack it or whatever else. I think you have to sack it actually in order to end the WoW. And then the Beastmen also have something like that, but the Beastmen's thing is herdstones, right? So the Beastmen go to like a province, they destroy a settlement in that province and create a herdstone, right? Which is almost like a settlement, but not really. It's really just kind of a big garrison, right? And then all of the adjacent settlements, you you then go and you beat them up and you raise them to the ground, and once all of them are raised you do this like blood ritual or whatever, which just forever locks them until the herdstone is destroyed. It forever locks them into this like state of being raised and full of chaos, corruption, and all this other stuff. And so it's like it's kind of nice that even though Korn and Norska and the orcs and uh the beastmen are all kind of doing the same sort of thing, right? Like raising and sacking and just like running over settlements. They're all doing it with like little different flavors of that on like the big campaign map.
yeah, very cool. Um,
Honestly, I'm just sad it's not coming out this year anymore. Rest in pepperonis.
yep, yeah, um, yeah. All right. Well, a couple other things I did that I wanted to talk about real quick.
Sure.
I read on tape again another Philip K. Dick book, "Blown by Tears." The Policeman said, which is another weird Philip K. Dick book. I recommend it, but like it is not as good as I think as either Clans of the Alphane Moon or the Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, were the previous ones I read. But it is interesting. It's basically about like it is in the future. Basically like America's like a police state, but like this guy who's like a famous TV star wakes up one day essentially, and he's like not famous anymore, and like no one recognizes him, and he can't figure out why. Um, and the reasons why are like you just kind of like follow your way through the society. It's just like weird stuff happening, right? Like the arc isn't particularly good as an arc. It's just like interesting thought experiments. But I'd recommend giving it a read. The other like two more quick things. I watched a 40-minute video about how many Super Mario Brothers games there are. I'll put a link in the description to it. Because it's like much more compelling than I expected it to be. But it's
Okay.
like it's essentially this guy. His name is John Masali. Um, who did like he basically did a survey on like of people because it's like it's how many Super Mario games there are, right? So like, and it's like basically kind of like trying to get consensus about what counts, right? Because like like for a big example, like most people don't count say like Mario Party or Mario Kart, right? Um, and like there are like less people, like there are more people that count like the Paper Mario games, but most people don't still there because like they're not core Super Mario games. I'm like there's like this weird thing where like some people count Super Paper Mario because it is kind of like a side scroller. But he goes through like the differences in all of the games. I found it very compelling because like the three that have like the most consensus are 1, 3, and World, and everything else has like much less consensus around it. Um, so it's an interesting kind of exploration. Um, and then the other big thing is this is semi breaking news is Action Button Review Cyberpunk 2077
Oh,
premieres.
I have been following the drama.
Yeah, because
Wait,
like
wait,
it
does
took
it
him
have a
like
premiere date?
it's tomorrow. Because like it took him like a week to export the fucking thing. And, like, you
Yeah,
know,
I followed the export, and then he got it into YouTube, but it wasn't processing to 4K.
yeah,
This is really funny. And then he wasn't processing to 4K, and he wasn't gonna release it at like a lower resolution or whatever, and
yeah.
everyone got really angry at him.
Oi, so it premieres tomorrow at 6 p.m. at twitch.tv slash 6 p.m. Eastern at twitch.tv slash action button. And if it's as long as anything else, we won't be able to watch the whole thing before raid. So
Yeah, wow.
um uh this is he did it in like the yellow square style that like Cyberpunk did its announcements in. Premiere 10/26/2021. Tune in to twitch.tv slash action button at 6 p.m. Eastern for a special premiere of the first episode of the review. After the review in its full form goes public on youtube.com slash action button. YouTube gave me some problems. However, the review is now safely uploaded and processed. It possesses a special structure I dare not spoil, but please allow me to the opportunity to premiere it properly. I might see if I can check in for just the premiere part of it. But this is the first episode of the review, and if you remember, he had like his previous reviews are like in like they have like an episodic, even though it's all one video.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll tune into that. That is that's super interesting. So I'm excited. That's like I've
I
been
am
waiting all
also
month.
super excited. I haven't even touched Cyberpunk, and I'm
Yeah.
super excited.
Yeah. So look forward to that. Now that I'm done pimping out somebody who has much more, who has many more followers than we than we do. Do you have anything else you want to promote before we get out of here?
I am going to be streaming this week, which is a little bit of an off stream. I'm going to be doing Darkest Dungeon 2 on Friday.
Ooh.
Miguel is out, and so I'm just taking over his indie investigations. And fucking Darkest Dungeon 2 is coming out. And I guess I'm finally going to break my Sabbath, because isn't it only available on the Epic Store?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna break my, not Sabbath. What did I say?
You said
Sabbath.
Sabbath, which is not the right word. Yeah.
Which is not the right word. I don't know what my moratorium
Moratorium. Yeah.
on getting anything from the Epic Store to finally get Darkest Dungeon 2 and play it. I actually haven't played all that much Darkest Dungeon 1, if I'm being completely honest. Like, I did not get super insane into that game. Like, I loved my time with it, but I think, like, I'm just gonna look it up now. I probably only have like 10 hours or something, right? Like,
Do you guys put out stuff on Epic Game Store?
mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, Mutazione is on the Epic Game Store, I'm pretty sure. God, where the fuck is Darkest Dungeon? Okay, yeah, I have 15 hours played in Darkest Dungeon, so
That's like
yeah.
nothing for you. That's like
Yeah, like
that's like
this baby mode in terms of games that I have put like hours and hours into. But I really enjoyed my time with Darkest Dungeon 1, and I'm excited to see what the second one is like, cuz the second one is a road trip,
yeah, yeah.
which is, neat and interesting.
Yeah, similar but different. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if you'd like to do stuff with this show, which I can't remember what I usually say, you can watch this, or if you want to email us and tell us what you thought about Dune, or any other things we talked about on the show, you can email us at somedirtsplaygames@gmail.com or podcast at somedirtsplaygames.com. You can follow us at twitch.tv/somedirtsplaygames where these episodes go out live. You can follow us on YouTube and all the other stuff. Like this goes out natively on SoundCloud. It's in every podcatcher. Rate and review us on iTunes. We have a Patreon too. Teleprompter fail. It happens. I get it. Funnily enough, I have never done this as a teleprompter. I just always kind of remember it, which is like, it's amazing. We've made it 6 years. By the way, 2 weeks ago was our 6-year anniversary,
Yeah,
which I'm
holy
going to bring
fuck,
up.
right?
Which means that the 300th episode is coming up soon. At which point we will be asking you all for your questions, or start thinking about questions. This is episode 293, I believe. So 7 more episodes until the big 3 hundo. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm gonna say with that, until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.
Transition out.
Okay.
Stop.